all. A beautiful day outside, so hopefully we can proceed with the business in a timely manner to get us all back outside. Can I ask you all to make sure you're on mute unless you're asked to speak? Do we have any apologies or substitutes, please?
Convener, I've got apologies from Councillors Anderson and Councillor Weir, and in terms of Standing Order 64, there are no substitute members attending today.
Okay, I'll tell Mark. I've just had an email from Willie having extreme difficulty trying to get into the meeting. I've told him I'll let the meeting know, and hopefully he'll be able to join us at some point.
Yeah, I've sent Councillor Doolan the link again to try and get him access to it, and I'll continue to do that, Convener, whilst the meeting's ongoing.
Thanks for that, Mark. Thank you. And moving on to agenda item 1, colleagues. Declaration of interest in terms of ethical standards in public life. Are there any? Willie, sorry, Willie.
Thanks, Convener. Just to declare an interest in item 5, adoption of the Council's active travel strategy as a member of the SPT board.
I suppose I should actually declare an interest in that one as well, but I don't think there's anything in there that we would need to stand down for, Mark. Can you maybe advise us on that?
Thank you, Convener. My own view is that members of the SPT board, I think the declaration would be sufficiently remote to allow elected members to participate in the decision making. Thanks for that, Mark, and Willie, thanks for pointing that out. By the way, I'd missed that one. So moving on, colleagues, to item number 2. It's an update paper and the analysis and actions taken relevant to rodent complaints, and that's going to be Andrew McPherson. Andrew.
Thanks, Convener. Yeah, the report just provides a scheduled update on the number of rat complaints received, and also some of the specific actions taken in response to the additional £150,000 funding which was provided to the service. As we've told before, the increasing problem of rats is not unique to North Lanarkshire. It's common throughout Scotland over the pandemic. Table paragraph in 2.2 provides details of the number of complaints. If we continue on the trajectory that table suggests, then we'll be looking at maybe 3,000 complaints being received this year. However, what I would like to do is quantify that and put it in context, that we need to realise that from the 17th of June, the service became free to residents. So the consequence of that is that we're now receiving more inquiries. So that doesn't necessarily equate to another 50% increase in number of rats. In terms of the performance on there, the up-to-date performance, because there is a lag from when this paper was produced, we're looking at more within 95% of responses within 2 days. So that certainly improves that figure. In addition to that, certainly from assistance to the Council GIS team, we've now managed to identify 6 areas where the problem of rats are the greatest based on the number of inquiries. Paragraphs 2.7 suggests the additional work that will be undertaken within those 6 areas, and it will also include the condition of the sewers within the 6 areas as well, which is obviously a source for rats. So the report for these is expected just within the next couple of days, and the intention is to come back to committee in approximately 6 months' time to provide details and action have been taken. So recommendations of the committee is just to really note the number of inquiries relevant to rats, as is in paragraph 2.2, the actions that will be taken within the 6 hotspot areas, and also agree that a report is brought back to committee in approximately 6 months' time. And that's me, Convener. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Willie Goldie, Councillor Goldie.
Thanks, Convener. It's just welcome the fact that we're now collecting these data. Now, there was a good result of a council motion. Essentially, do we know how many other areas nearly made the hotspot? But Andrew, and is there potential, if there's an increase in these areas, that the hotspots will be increased? And just about the other areas of that, I take it that the service will still continue at the other areas, and this won't be at the detriment of the increased resources to the hotspots?
Yep, it's a good question, Councillor Goldie. It doesn't mean that we're not undertaking any sort of proactive work in any of the other areas. we'll continue with that. But we do realise within these 6 areas, then that's where we've highlighted the biggest concern. I don't know how many nearly made it. I would have to look at the figures, and it's not an exact science. We've tried to sort of make the areas as broad as we can, so possibly can't even answer that question because we didn't split the whole council area into areas. So, but yes, to answer the question, no, we're not leaving everything else behind. Everything else will maintain.
Well, I've seen your thumbs up there, so you're quite happy with that. Councillor Carragher, Tracy?
Thanks, Michael. Just reiterate what Willie said there. I'm really glad that we're now recording all of these and taking action. Following on from that, do we have sufficient staff within, I'm going to call it call centres, probably the words that I'm using, to take the calls? And just is it a separate call centre for issues like this for pest control as it would be for them calling in about a housing matter? And also, given that the charges are now have been suspended until next year, which obviously we all welcome, does that pose a problem within the service that some things are charged and other things aren't charged, or is it easy within the service? I hope I make myself make sense there when I'm asking this question. If I'm not, come back to me. So thanks.
Andrew, do you want to comment on that, please?
Yeah, no, you're making perfect sense. The first question was relating to the customer services hub, and that's where all the council's incoming calls will go. There was a sort of staffing issue there that's now been addressed. There's additional staff are being recruited and trained as we speak, and they'll be in place probably towards the middle of September. So that should see. In addition to that, though, our own support services team within protective services or within my own service generally are taking calls directly from the members of the public. So we're trying to extend that as much as possible, and people can still report them through the web page as well. In terms of the charging, how it's not been an issue. It's quite clear that when people do call, then they're told that for rats and mice it's free. For everything else, there is a charge.
You happy with that, Tracy? Thank you. Councillor Logue, Jim?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. One point and then one minor question. I agree totally with Willie and Tracy that we should always base our operational strategies on an evidence-based perspective. And in terms of the question, it's in paragraph 2.6. For the avoidance of any doubt, Andrew, can you clarify when you say Craig Newt there, is it Craig Newt Wisher or Craig Newt Airdrie?
I think that's Craig Newt and Wishaw, but I'll check that with you, Councillor Logue, and I'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Thanks very much, Andrew.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I don't see any further questions in the chat bar, colleagues, so can I then direct you to the recommendations, which are on the bottom of page 5. 3 of them there. I would quite happy to agree. I don't hear anybody saying anything otherwise, so thanks very much for that, colleagues. Moving on to item 3, which is Smart Waste Monitoring Project. Colleagues, this paper is here for noting, so I'll just move to questions. Is there any questions on this? Willie Goldie. Willie, you're muted.
That's probably not a bad thing, Chair. Essentially, this has really come out of the community boards, and I've got a couple of questions and then a request for an additional recommendation, which I've circulated to Mark. The waste monitoring, we know it's going to measure the amount of waste in the bins, and that the bins are tagged and it's linked to a location. Have we had any negative response from the community on this? I know we gave an extensive leafleting campaign out to the areas that were going to be affected. So have we had any negative response from the residents? And just in the future, is there the potential for fines? Because if there is, my concern would be it may lead to increased fly tipping of that. So these two questions, and then essentially, I don't know whether Mark wants to share the amendment. Essentially, what it is really just to retrospectively let the community boards know this is happening within the areas, and also to communicate to them what the rationale for doing it is. But I'm happy to have the questions answered.
Yeah, I'll bring Andrew in a second, but it quite clearly says within the report that there's no intention to add fines onto this, quite clearly. Andrew, do you want to add anything else there, please?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Goldie. Yeah, the response from the community has actually been, well, if I say response, there's hardly been any response, which is probably a good news story. Out of the, as you know, the 5,000 properties is the sort of the target audience for this pilot, if you like. But within that pilot, we're trialling out within just about 750 properties or thereabouts. Out of that, we've had about 13 people who have come back and opted out of it. So 1.3, 1.5%. So a very, very low opt-out number, which I suppose suggests that most people are fairly content with what's been proposed.
Yeah.
On the slight amendment there, I have got no problem with adding that in. Is anyone else otherwise minded?
Agreed.
Okay, that's fine.
Thanks, convener. Cheers.
Right, so we've agreed that, so we'll move on to item 4, which is...
Michael, I put in, I've got some points I want to raise.
Ethan, sorry, in you come, sorry.
No worries. Thank you, Michael. So at the previous report brought to committee on the proposed pilot last year, Andrew offered reassurance on some of the points of concern that were raised at that meeting, including confirming that residents in the area chosen for the pilot could opt out if they didn't feel comfortable taking part, and on data collection. I want to note that it's welcome that the choice to opt out and that personal details are not being collected are reflected in the paper today. And I think the inclusion in the report shows a strong responsiveness from officers on this issue to relay concerns previously raised by councillors, and in doing so provide in general greater confidence in the initiative. Whilst it's right that the pilot's not mandatory for any residents who don't want to be involved, it goes without saying that the council would obviously hope people in the chosen areas of Cumbernauld and Moodiesburn can be encouraged and reassured to take part because of the possible future benefits for recycling in North Lanarkshire. And Andrew's response to Willie, and that there's only been 13 opt-outs so far, shows that fortunately that is the case thus far. The statement in paragraph 2.6 that North Lanarkshire will be the first council in Scotland to trial this type of smart waste monitoring project, I think that shows the importance that is attached by the local authority to improving recycling rates, which is clearly something we have to strive to achieve. And it's slightly touched on by Willie, but just to ask for more clarity on it. And given the importance of ensuring that as many of the targeted 5,000 households as possible do choose to take part in the initiative and also choose to stay involved once the tags have been attached to the bin, I was just wondering from Andrew's perspective if he's able to offer any comment and what proportion of the overall 5,000 the council estimates do need to accept the offer of participating in the project and staying involved with it for the local authority to be able to gather sufficient data and then to make strong evidence-based conclusions and the key points of the council are looking to generate information as is set out in paragraph 2.3. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Nathan. Apologies again for overlooking you. Andrew, do you want to come in and respond to that, please? Thank you, Andrew.
Because I'm not too sure. We've not really thought about where is the sort of a guillotine that we simply can't continue with the pilot. So I suppose we would have to perhaps cross that bridge when we came to it. But certainly the evidence thus far suggests that, with an opt-out rate at the moment of, less than 2%, we're hoping, that, even if we were to get, 70, 80% of people participating, I think that would be a success. But at the moment, it looks as if it's in the high 90s. So I certainly think, we're moving in the right path. And the reason that we're doing the small pilot is to make sure we, any mistakes we can iron out before we extend it into the 5,000.
You okay with that, Nathan? Thank you. Councillor Ashaf, Junaid, please.
Thanks, Michael. So I've had a number of questions from constituents on this, and just people from generally Cumbernauld just having discussions on this, and generally, obviously, just fighting back against the whole aspect of, nothing's crazy is going to happen. There's no charges being, allocated, all that sort of thing. And I do use the line from what's basically like in 2.5, which says, is just being used to measure the effectiveness of communication materials and the role they can play in improving our recycling performance. But that doesn't really answer the question as to what is the sort of aspiration of what the council would like to do. If, you know, what does a positive outcome from this information collecting process actually look like? You know, what does the data actually show us? And from there, what could be the proposed actions that would be taken from this? I mean, I've just been making that, I've just been you know, thinking of my own sort of you know, answers to these things, saying you know, you know, the specific trucks that are going out, we can find out which ones are more efficient to save money here and there. And I've been trying to muse over these sort of things. But is there any definitive answers you could give to us what the proposed actions will be at the end of this pilot if we get positive information or negative information? And could you also tell us what positive or negative information will actually look like? Just so it just gives us a better idea to speak to constituents, because right now you say there's not going to be charges brought out, and then they said, well, why are you doing it? I'm saying for effectiveness problems, and then they're just saying that sounds like a year from now you're going to change your mind and introduce charges, and we're going to have the wool pulled over our eyes. And obviously that's not the reality of the situation. I just want a better answer to be able to tell my constituents if possible.
Thanks, Sinead. Before I bring Andrew back in, I think it's very worthwhile to remember this is a Scottish Government project. It's been asked by Zero Waste Scotland for North Lanarkshire to be the pilot here. So, you know, so we're working in conjunction with Zero Waste Scotland, Scottish Government on this. Andrew, would you like to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Kavira. Yeah, and that was going to be my first point. This isn't a council initiative per se. This is a national Scottish Government initiative, which has been supported by North Lanarkshire Council. So in terms of the benefits, the key one for Zero Waste Scotland is that when it's rolled out, we will initially have data over possibly a number of months on the volumes of waste that are collected, particularly from recycling bins. There will then be targeted communication to these properties with regards to paper and card or glass, metal, plastic, or just general communication about recycling and what goes in what bin. And then from that, we will then be able to see what difference is there in the waste within the bins. So if we can see a gradual move, if there's a substantial move because of one type of communication, and that's the type of communication that we'll use generally across the whole area and the whole of Scotland moving forward. So that's the sort of the benefits in terms of communication. In terms of other things as well, it gives obviously it will give the local authority data to make sure that we contain those bins at those streets and those locations as well, so that we can get that information back. So the whole purpose in this is really to look at what principal communication about what is the most effective form of communication to increase recycling. That's going to be the primary reason for doing this.
Hey, Sinead, are you okay with that?
Yeah, Michael. I wasn't trying to make a point about North Lanarkshire Council running this either. I'm just saying, obviously, when you speak to constituents, they don't really care, do they? They just hear North Lanarkshire. Was the council not doing this then? I'm like, well, they are, but it's slightly more complicated, and obviously they bulldoze over the ideas, but that has helped. Thank you for that.
Okay, I can see Paddy, Councillor Hogg.
Thanks, Kavira. Just a query that, given the fact that these are radio frequency identification tags, what do they actually do? Do they send pictures? Or what exactly are they doing? Where's the data being collected? Is it being collected in the recycling lorries that come around, or is it being sent to one of the local buildings? Could I just have an explanation of that?
Thanks for that, Paddy. Andrew?
Yeah, Councillor Hogg, yeah. The information that's being collected is just simply the weight of the bin. They don't take any pictures. There's no sort of data protection implications at all. It's simply the weight in that bin which is attached to a property, and that's the information that's recorded. It's recorded on the vehicle, and that information is then put down it's into a simple spreadsheet. There's nothing more scientific than that. And that's all done. We're obviously trying to limit any sort of data that we collect to make sure that that there is a high uptake, and we're not specifically straying into the areas of data protection.
Thanks for that. Paddy, you okay with that? Take it that's a yes. Colleagues, so we've got a slight change to the recommendation, which will insert Willie's amendment, are we quite happy with that? Thank you. Now moving on to item 4 on the agenda, which is a climate change committing to net zero. James McKinstry is going to speak to this paper. James.
Thank you, Chair. The Council's climate plan is included in our overall programme of work, and what we've provided to committee today is an update on our plan. We've also rebranded the plan. It was previously called Carbon Management Plan, but we've rebranded it as a climate plan because we think that gives a stronger emphasis on the actions that we take and how that impacts on our environment. And the plan, which is attached to the committee report, we're seeking approval to go to a period of consultation on this plan, and the plan provides progress, an update on progress that we've been making, and also for the first time it sets targets over the areas of building emissions, emissions from waste, and emissions from transport. And present the recommendations of the report to committee. There are just a few points I would want to mention. And the first thing is, after the consultation period's end, we would be looking to bring back to committee the completed plan, and that would coincide with the closure of the international COP26 event. And the second thing I'd like to point out is the updated plan is, as well as building on the work to date within the council, it builds on the policy direction which yourself as elected members have been giving us over the last couple of years. And if I can draw your attention to paragraphs 2.7 to 2.10 on the accompanying committee paper, which is on pages 19 and 20 of your agenda, you'll see that for each head of service area within the council, we're asking heads of service to prepare individual climate plans, and these plans will be collated into a council-wide plan or a roadmap as to how we're going to work towards achieving net zero by 2030. And from that work, we can start to look to see what sorts of challenges we may face as we go forward. For example, the availability and the adequacy of finance. And just in conclusion, there's been a lot of good work that's been done over the last few years within the council. We have reduced our carbon emissions by 34% since 2015-2016. We can see that climate change is getting embedded in the policy development work that's been done by the council, and is also becoming more mainstreamed within the work we're doing within services. And you'll be aware as a committee that we have our own COP26 events running within North Lanarkshire. Our first event, which was held in May of this year, was about raising awareness with staff and external stakeholders. Our second event, which is being held next month, is working with local businesses and how local businesses can affect changes and their actions in relation to climate change going forward. And the last event, which will be done at the same time as the international COP26 event, and quite arguably the most important one, will be an education event where we'll be working with our young people, or more importantly, they'll be working with us as to how they see the future going forward in relation to climate change. And just as I said earlier, once the plan is updated, we'll be bringing it back to committee. We do believe it will be strengthened by this consultation, and we feel as well that we could bring back a roadmap to a committee at a future meeting also.
Thanks for that, James. Councillor Goldie-Willie.
Thanks, Convener. I'm going to start off by being pedantic. Just a council meeting a while ago there, we indicated that at the impacts, we should change the environmental impact to environmental/carbon impact, and have that, as a headline, not necessarily commented in report. And it isn't in this one, and some of the other ones it isn't. It's in some of them, we're getting there, but it's just to remind that we should be looking at that. The next thing is really, I appreciate the council is doing an awful lot on carbon management. I've been involved in some of it, and we have a long way to go, but hopefully we should be starting to get there, although it will be a very hard route for each and every one of us. Just a couple of questions. When we're looking at net zero, what do we consider net zero? Essentially, we're looking at the burning of hydrogen fuels. I know I sent some information on it, was on hydrogen boilers, and I know I haven't seen anything to say we're going to move to hydrogen boilers, but just the production of hydrogen fuel contributes a lot to greenhouse gases and carbon emissions. As a council, are we going to consider net zero as net zero to North Lanarkshire, or will we consider the aspects where there's a contribution to what we're doing to carbon elsewhere? And is there any plans for the council to offset our carbon to other places? It's just I know they're fairly general questions of that, but it's just to get the general view on it about this early paper.
No, thanks very much for that, Willie. That's very good questions there. James, would you like to come in there, please?
Kind of 3 specific points there. In relation to hydrogen, we've got no plans at the moment to use that technology. We're aware that it's not always seen as the kind of cleanest technology, and I'm aware of the information you're talking about, Councillor Goldie, and we have had a look at that. In relation to offsetting, we're not planning to do that at the present time. That's something that we may need to consider later on, but I don't think we're planning to do that at the present time. I think what we've been doing over the last few years, you may recall that there was a very challenging internal audit report in this area about 24 months ago, and what we've done is we've really focused across the council as to how we're approaching this area, and one of the key things that we're trying to do is really get it mainstreamed into all service areas, so it's not seen as an add-on, a bit like, I suppose, which maybe health and safety was seen in the 70s and 80s, etc. And we're starting to see some really good improvements in that area. So we feel confident that we can now go forward and start to create a route map to kind of net zero. As the sort of definition of net zero, I'll probably ask my colleague Linda Stevenson to come in on that, because she's the expert on that. She could probably explain it better than I, and certainly a lot more simpler.
Linda?
Yeah, in terms of net zero, we do, for the council and for North Lanarkshire, do measure our own footprint, as in the emissions that are emitted in North Lanarkshire, and that includes like the transport emissions. However, we are aware of the sort of background of the Paris Agreement and the intent behind it to be fair and equitable. So in terms of our draft building target, we've adopted a recommendation from that's came out of the Tyndall Centre based on the Paris Agreement for energy emissions. So that's what our own target's been based on for that.
Willie, are you happy with that? Yep, thanks for that. Councillor Wilson, Nathan?
Thank you, Convener. I just want to welcome the updated draft plan and the actions the Council has taken and proposed to pursue in order to ensure that North Lanarkshire plays its part in combating the threat of climate change and the impacts that we're already experiencing. The recent report published by the IPCC, described as a code red for humanity by the UN, was deeply concerning and highlights that more must be done if we are to have any hope of keeping temperature rises below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And it's vital that further measures are agreed by world leaders at the upcoming UK hosted COP26 conference in Glasgow, alongside just generally welcoming important steps that the Council continues to take in this matter of massive importance for us all. I was hoping James could provide clarification related to the points on the conversion of all fleet cars and vehicles to electric in North Lanarkshire. On the short medium term action section on page 49, it's noted that the Council's target is for this process to have taken place by 2025, specifically for all vehicles up to 3.5 TGVW. Back in page 45, there's a reference to 269 larger vehicles having to be replaced by new electric vehicles between 2025 and 2030. I'm just looking for a bit of clarification on why the 2025 target mentioned in the report is specific vehicles up to 3.5 TGVW, and why, as I understand is the case from the information set out in the report, it doesn't include every fleet vehicle irrespective of weight. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Nathan. James, do you want to come in and answer that, please?
Yeah, I'll come in on that, and maybe I'll ask Andrew if he wants to add anything to it, because we're quite fortunate that we've got a head of service for that area in the committee as well. I think I mentioned in my verbal presentation that the plan for the first time sets specific targets for buildings, waste and transport. Now, what we've done with those targets that we've put in the plan, we haven't just come up with targets. We've looked at the financial plans within the council. We've looked at what services are doing within their own services plans. and that's what we believe can be achieved by 2025 within the resource availability that we've got at the present time, and that along with all the other actions that are in the climate plan should enable us to continue to make really good progress to reducing our emissions going forward. But I'll maybe ask Andrew if he wants to come in and add anything to that.
Thanks, James. Yep, just on specifically on the fleet vehicles, Councillor, they're separated into light good vehicles, which is 3.5 tonnes and below, and also HGV heavy goods vehicles, which are above. The reason why there's no mention of the HGVs at the moment is that the technology simply isn't there at the moment. We are trialling. We do have one electric RCV on our fleet. To be fair, that is performing relatively well. It's been put into our most remote area and also our most rural areas as well, and it seems to be delivering, so it bodes well. However, when the only reason that the council could afford that vehicle is we receive 50% of the costs. I think it's roughly about £350,000 to buy that vehicle, whereas at the moment a diesel vehicle is £160,000. So as the technology increases over the years, accordingly the price of that technology will also decrease as well, and it will come to a position where it will become affordable for large, public organisations to move down that line. In terms of our LGV fleet, we have a roadmap, and it's by 2027-28 we will be fully electric on our LGV fleet. We have taken the decision not to push for 2025 for a number of reasons. Firstly, is simply due to cost as well. We have perfectly good vehicles, and to move them at a time when the council's capital resource is somewhat reduced, then it's probably better that we maintain that fleet for a couple of years afterwards. That 2025 date is a figure which has been set and a challenge for local authorities and all public organisations. And I think, to be fair, across the board, I think we're probably even ahead of the curve when it comes to actually replacing our fleet. So we have got a projected time frame from it, and it's I think definitely in line with, if not better than others.
Nathan, you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm happy with that response, Michael. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Councillor Hogg, Paddy.
Thanks, Convener. Just a couple of observations I'd like to make. One is a sort of update of my assessment of the situation as the person who moved the motion for the climate emergency a couple of years ago. We seem to be obsessed with carbon, and in some ways rightly so. And what I mean by that is the context that a third of the soil of the planet is known to be destroyed, and soil itself is the second largest carbon sink on the planet. And the key cause of the destruction of the soil and its own, what we term as microbiome, is the fact that there has been massive industrial and agricultural use of glyphosate. I'm not rehashing the argument from last Thursday, but this is observable scientific fact. And not until the end of the use of glyphosate will that third of the planet's soil be healed. So given that the soil is a massive carbon sink, there seems to be no plans from the WEF, that's the World Economic Forum, or other groups, and there seems to be a blind spot for the massive damage being done to the soil as a carbon sink by the excessive use in agriculture and farming of glyphosate. Second point is, again, on the obsession with CO2, methane is well known to be at least 80 times more destructive of the climate. And obviously, we did bring a halt to potential leakage of methane from the likes of fracking in the UK, which is a good thing because there's constant leaking from America. And I would just like to flag up that CH4 methane is much more lethal to global climate destruction, which is the word I would use, as opposed to climate change. And there tends to be massive conflict of interest at higher levels from corporate power, global corporate companies such as Monsanto and Bayer that now own them. And I just thought I'd put that observation in as my updated perspective in this situation. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, that was an observation, and we'll leave it there. Councillor McManus, Cameron.
Cheers, Michael. I seen on page 45 the biodiversity action that's happening about the wildflower meadows and the pollinator habits and the cycleways and the walking paths. Just to see if the council are going to use weed kills, considering most weed kills are dangerous to wildlife, or if they're going to leave them to grow naturally.
Again, I think we're draining off here a wee bit. I think it was quite absolutely explicit in what we said we would do with weed killers. So, James, do you want to come in there and answer any questions you can find there? Thanks.
I'm not sure there's a question there that's not been considered by the council in the past, in terms of, I think in terms of, again, we've got the head of service on the call today as well, that's in charge of the biodiversity area. So I think these areas are managed in line with all the guidance and the policies that exist. But I'm not sure if Nicole wants to add anything or not, or if she feels I've covered that adequately.
If I might just add, the member's correct in terms of biodiversity. So we have teams that are focused on managing biodiversity, and actually later in the committee we will look at the extension of wildflower meadow areas and an extension of biodiversity. The active travel paper, again, which we're coming on to discuss, has potential linkages in terms of biodiversity too. So yes, there's linkages between the use of herbicides and biodiversity, but I think we have to look at the appropriate management regime in the right area. So where we have areas of biodiversity, wildflower meadows and so on and so forth, bumblebee corridors, then no, we don't use herbicides, but there are specific areas identified which where herbicides are used to control weeds and grass edges, etc. I think I'll just leave it there, Convener.
Thanks for that. Cameron, are you okay with that?
Aye, that's great. Cheers, Michael.
Thanks. Well, I don't see any further names in the chat bar, so can I direct you to the recommendations at the bottom of page 17, which there are 3 of. Can we agree on these recommendations? Thank you. Moving on to item 5, which is on page 53 to 92, which is adoption of the Council's active travel strategy. And Nicole is going to take us through this paper. Nicole.
Thank you, Convener. This strategy will put in place for the first time a cohesive and holistic framework to prioritise and accelerate active travel interventions across North Lanarkshire. These will very much align with the plan for North Lanarkshire in terms of our town visions, town community hub developments, park master plans, etc., and very much provide better active travel networks between our communities and, importantly, also across the local authority boundary. They'll deliver improved health and well-being and environmental, social inclusion and public access benefits. Members will be aware of the publication of the updated National Transport Strategy 2 in February of 2020, and with that the Scottish Government signalling that encouraging active travel was one of their priorities. Strathclyde Passenger Transport is also currently updating its regional transport strategy, which will help shape regional transport policy for the next 20 years in our area and places a similar emphasis on active travel. Therefore, North Lanarkshire as a key player has its part to play in driving forward active travel. Therefore, development of this active travel strategy is timely, not least because of the challenges presented by COVID-19, but that it may bring permanent change to the way people will live, work and travel, both across within our area. It's proposed to members that an annual monitoring report is brought to committee to ensure visibility and to the communities of North Lanarkshire to show progress. The recommendations are there, Convener, and I'm happy to take any questions on the paper.
Thanks, Nicole. Are there any questions or comments? Councillor Goldie. Willie.
Thanks, Convener. It's just a couple of questions on we're encouraging people to cycle or whatever, and it's interesting to see where there's dedicated cycle paths, there's no issues. Some of our roadways have cycle paths which, because there's no road traffic orders on them, vehicles can park in them, and this seems to be off-putting by for cyclists to use them. It's just to see, is there any consideration in the council to look at this in the future to see if there's anything that we can do to encourage the use of the cycle paths within our main routes? And I've got another question as well. Just we look at diverting away from the private car and just the increase in electric vehicles. And I know we're in the joint kind of group with Scottish Power and the other councils and all that to provide electric charging points. In a lot of circumstances, people who have their own property in a drive can put an electric charging point in there. Is there any potential, and I know we have council ones within facilities like Broadwood and Park and Rides of that, would you see any potential in the future that there could be electric on-street parking points for residents who don't have access to a drive or to a charging place? Thanks, Convener. Cheers.
I think the pace development between the SEN and Scottish South Lanarkshire and North Lanarkshire have already delivered some of that. But Nicole, I'll bring you in.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Goldie, two good questions, and I'll answer the first one in terms of the existing use of our active travel routes, and also tie that to the new strategy as well. So you're quite right, we do have some existing active travel routes. There's been extensive consultation, both from neighbouring local authorities, our communities, current users, and hopefully future users as well of our active travel routes. And some of what's come through is key, just as you say, that some of the existing routes, because they're on road, are difficult to use. So what we'll be doing as we move forward is, I think initially this is a holistic, it's a cohesive strategy. So this is looking at what interventions do we need to make where, what is the most appropriate, and what are those key routes. So this is the first time that we've actually looked at active travel at scale and laid out those strategic routes. Normally, in the past, what we've done is take the opportunity to complete small pieces of the jigsaw, as it were, when opportunities arise. So for the first time, we've set out at strategic level, here are the routes that are required, and it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we do everything we can, when both with existing routes, but also those future routes as well, to make sure that they're usable and that they feel relatively safe for users. Because this is part of a wider, that's why I made reference to transport strategies, as you'll be aware as members. This is part of, yes, a shift away from the car, but actually this is about offering choice to people. This is about saying we've got choice. You talked here about, in fact, the second question went quite nicely in terms of areas where there's increased deprivation, difficulty access to motor vehicles, etc. Then this provides a real alternative, that we've got active travel routes, that they feel safe, that they're usable by users, and that they're accessible. You'll notice that the journey times are outlined there as well. So it's mainly about providing choice. The issue of on-street chargers or electric charging is an extremely interesting one, so I'm going to try and be as concise as I can in the answer. The convener mentioned the absolutely, as you did yourself, Councillor Goldie, we've been one of two local authorities alongside South Lanarkshire in the pilot project with Scottish Power Energy Networks, Transport Scotland, Scottish Government to roll out Project PACE. I'll be bringing a paper to wrap up that project, as it were, to the next cycle of Environment and Transportation Committee. That as a pilot project was trying to attempt to find out, can we put in chargers at scale and at pace, but balance that between the commercial interests that exist with charging stations as well. So there is currently studies ongoing within Scottish Government, of which we are participating in as well, where we're trying to determine that balance point, because actually there is commercial interest in the provision of chargers, and one of the main tensions is actually ability of Scottish Power Energy Network substations to cope with the level of demand on charging stations. So there's a balance point to be brought, but what we don't want to do is scare away any commercial partners coming into the area, because that's where the majority of the investment could potentially come from. So what we've done with Project PACE is show what's possible. There are a number of really difficult questions across the country to crack, and one of them is, how do we provide access to charging for people who don't have access to it at the moment? But what I would say is, if we look at the current provision of petrol stations, they aren't on every street, so it's about providing appropriate hub facilities that people can more readily access. So a tricky question. I hope I've answered it where we are at this point.
Just a
Thanks,
supplementary comment, Chair,
Yep.
if that's okay.
On you go,
I'm
Willie.
aware of the project we had with the charging points, and I'm also aware of the very generous fact that North Lanarkshire Council didn't charge for charging at them, and I'm also aware that to bring in on-street charging may exacerbate the issue of commercial companies taking advantage of these. But thanks for the answer.
Thanks for that, Willie. Councillor Cullen, David Cullen.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's more just a comment. I welcome the active travel strategy and the focus it places on linking up communities across West Lothian, across North Lanarkshire, particularly in Airdrie North, where there's some rural villages, and it'll provide an opportunity to link people out in the villages with Airdrie Town Centre itself. I'm looking forward to seeing actual work on the ground to bring that strategy to fruition, and I do welcome the report and thank Nicole for bringing the report to committee.
Thank you for that, David. Thank you very much. Councillor Logue, Jim.
Yeah, just an additional related point in relation to the point that Willie raised about car charging points. I've been down to see the new houses recently in Old Milton and Toll Bridge, and I observed that every terraced house there has got an individual car charging point to the front of the house. This is a new development, and I'm led to believe it probably were the first authority in Scotland to provide car charging points at each house. I think that's absolutely tremendous, and I think the council should be complimented on that.
Thanks for that, Jim. I think we should be. Colleagues, I don't see any further comments in the chat bar, so can I direct you to the recommendations, which are two of, and it's in page 53. I'll be happy to agree the recommendations. Thank you. So we're now moving on. I've just messed up my screen. Oh no, oh no, oh no. So we're now moving on to item 6 on the agenda, which is the winter services policy and procedures. Now we've got a report here. Before we go to the report, I would like to put on record my thanks to the member officer working group, which sat over the summer period and has quite a bit of feedback into this report. Can I give my heartfelt thanks to the members who took time out, and especially during recess. One member and John Ashcroft actually came in on their holidays, so a lot of hard work has been into this, and obviously I'd like to also thank the chair, who was Alan Beveridge, who interrupted his acting career. But anyway, I'll not say any more on that just now, but Nicole, would you like to come in and give us an overview of this report, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. I'll say very few words on the winter service policy and procedures because I know that members are very familiar with the policy, which is brought annually at cycle 3 every single year. This report, of course, lays out the potential procedures for the winter period of 21-22, noting that the Council has an obligation under the Road Scotland Act to take steps that it considers reasonable to prevent snow and ice endangering safe passage of pedestrians and vehicles over public roads. We obviously work in partnership with Amy Public Services to discharge these duties, ensuring that all the obligations of the Council are met. There is a requirement for us to annually review this process and procedure, and indeed, as the convener has pointed out, this year, in addition to the officer working group, which sits every year, there was also an additional member officer working group to review the rollout of the policy during the winter period of 2020-21. The report presents elected members with the details of the winter service policy, and I would draw members to the attention really of the key changes to the policy that's proposed for this winter period. They are in paragraphs cited in paragraphs 2.15 and 2.16, which relates to the key outputs of the member officer working group. The key recommendation and change from last year's policy is the action and improvement agreed by the member officer working group embodied within recommendation 3, which includes the refilling of grit bins, which are less than 50% full prior to the commencement of the winter service period. The remaining recommendations 1 and 2 are set out, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that, Nicole. Willie Goldie.
It's just really to echo the thoughts of the chair there. It was worthwhile taking part in this group. It was conducted well. It was interesting to discuss the possibilities of what we could and couldn't do with the officers, and there were some full and frank discussions and all that, but we came to agreement in the end, and I think it was exceedingly worthwhile doing it.
Thanks for that, Willie. Councillor Carragher, Tracy?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I echo what yourself and Willie have said as well, and also I'm really glad that the recommendation was agreed by the member officer working group, because clearly if a bin is less than 50% full, it means that members of our communities are using it. So I think it's important that they've got something there to help them help us, I suppose, and help themselves during the winter period. So yeah, I'm really pleased that this has been taken on board. Thanks.
Thanks, Tracy. Willie?
Thanks, convener. Nicole, as a question regarding the grip bins. I mean, one of the biggest issues that we were getting, well, I was certainly getting throughout the ward that I represent, was that when people went to use the grip bins, they were full of stagnant water. Now, I mean, I know this is not any fault of the councils or anything like that. During better weather conditions, for the want of a better term, young kids, etc., go down, and it's natural instinct with some of them. They'll flip the lid up, then the next thing, before we know it, rain's coming. Now, I mean, we also witnessed, well, I certainly witnessed last year, broken glass, bottles being discarded in these containers. Now, I certainly, the one outside my own home, Nicole, when it was being replenished by Amy, I went out, it's directly across the road from my house, went out and respectfully asked the employees, could they remove the broken glass, etc., any foreign objects that had been lumped into the grip bins. Now, I was told at that particular time by the employees that it wasn't their directive to do this. But thankfully, John Ashcroft, John dealt with the matter for me, and he assured me that it is the task and of the AME contractors to take any foreign objects out of these. But it is a common problem we're getting, Nicole, with, do you know what I mean? The grip bins stinking, full of rubbish, different things like that. And it was just to ask respectfully, is there anything we can do to prevent these happenings? Thanks, convener.
Thanks, Willie. I think it is there within the report. It does say that Amy will, when they're going to be filling them up again, they will take out any foreign objects. But Nicole, would you like to come in and maybe give a wee bit more meat to the bones, please?
Yeah, of course, convener and Councillor Doolan, it's a very good point, and actually I recall the correspondence that we had during the winter period on this matter. It's absolutely correct that it is part of the agreement with Amy that when they go out to the grip bins, that any foreign objects, litter, etc., is removed. In terms of the outcome of the member officer working group, in order to determine which bins need to be filled, they will need to each be visited and inspected. So at that point, we'll be able to see if there are any foreign objects within the bins, and a works order will be issued to Amy, either to refill the bin or to go out and remove the foreign objects. So that's one way in which we'll tackle it. But I guess the second that I would suggest is, I know, and I know at first hand through this winter, just how much communities rely on these grip bins. They do sit at key locations within the communities. So I would ask that, given they are a valuable resource and a valuable asset, that we ask communities not to use them as litter bins. Litter bins are provided. That we ask communities to look after the one that's in their street, because I know during the winter it's a real focal point for individuals. How full is their grip bin, what's in it. So I would ask people to keep an eye out on it, to help us to help them, because it's very difficult and it's very time consuming when the teams do go out to the grip bins and have to spend their time emptying it before they actually refill it. So that would be my plea. It's on two fronts. We'll work with Amy to make sure that the bins are emptied, but also that we ask communities to help us to help them too.
Thanks for that, Nicole. Willie, are you okay with that? Yep, okay, thanks. Colleagues, I don't see any other names in the chat bar, so can I direct you to the recommendations, which there are 3 of, page 93. Are we happy to agree the report? Yep, okay, thanks very much for that. Takes us nicely on to item number 7, which is tree asset management. And Nicole is going to speak to this. Nicole.
Thank you again, convener. So members will be aware, I think this is the third in a series of papers that I've brought regarding the council's tree asset. We know that North Lanarkshire has a significant tree resource, much of which is mature or over mature. But across the council area, we also know that we don't know the full extent of the asset, and its condition is unknown and not under proactive management. And I've brought 2 papers on that today. So since the last report to committee in November 2020, as we set out at that time, Environmental Assets has strengthened its approach to tree asset management, including the production of a draft strategy, which members are able to read in Appendix 1. I would like to note that the draft strategy at this point only covers trees within council ownership. So this was on a risk-based approach, and those which are managed and maintained directly by Environmental Assets. That includes, on this risk-based approach, trees adjacent to highways and schools, which members will understand provide a greater degree of risk to the council and our communities. There are other assets that aren't covered by this report, but what I would say is that I would see this as an evolution, and that if we get the approach right here via these pilots, and we begin to understand the scale of work and the costs involved, that we begin to roll that out across all of the council's tree asset management. So the update report, if we focus on that, lays out the findings of the pilots which we set out last year. So that focused on 2 wards, Ward 12 in Airdrie South and Ward 19 in Motherwell South East and Ravenscraig. And it sets out the way ahead for future surveys and remediation works. There is an appendix to the report which shows members the condition which trees were found and the relative locations. This is really just to give us an idea of the scale of the task ahead of us and the potential cost to the council to bring trees into proactive management. As we wrote this report, a second issue has really come to the fore across the UK, and it is the issue and impact of ash dieback. It's escalated rapidly, particularly in the south of England, and it's likely that Scotland will soon be in a similar trajectory. The current evidence suggests that 50 to 75% of Scotland's approximately 11 million mature ash trees may die over the next 2 decades. Remediation of this is likely to be a significant cost to the council. Current estimates look in excess of £1 million per annum, and there are resource implications in that in establishing both inspection and management regimes required to deliver the strategy. So the second part really was early sight, and the first component of the report to give members assurance that we're working very hard to understand the extent of the asset. And following this successful pilot in 2 areas, we'll begin to roll that out across the other areas of the council. The recommendations are 4 in number, and they're laid out in the paper, and I'm happy to take any questions, convener.
Thanks, Nicole. Councillor Goldie, Willie.
Thanks, convener. Just a couple of questions. The first one's on ash dieback of that. Can you be proactive on it? I know the council policy is never to remove a healthy tree. Is there anything like barriers or that you can put to remove trees to ensure that spread doesn't happen? Or if it's in the area, is it likely to happen anyway? The second question, it really comes from the questions, and it's page 137, number 5, where no action is taken simply to allow more light. And it's just to see, has consideration being given to the health aspects of this? I know that poor light in properties has been associated with vitamin D lack and seasonal affective disorder and poor mental health. So I know the point says we won't take action, but if there was a severe medical condition of that, is that likely to be a consideration? Thanks, convener.
Thanks, Willie. Nicole, do you want to come in on that, please?
Yeah, thank you, convener, and thank you, Councillor Goldie, for the questions. In terms of the first one, I'm not at this point going to suggest that I'm any form of expert on ash dieback, so I will revert to the team and ask if is there any mitigation that we can put in place to try and prevent ash dieback. But my understanding at the moment is, once it's in an area, it spreads very rapidly, and the only solution is simply to remove the trees. Part of the challenge, of course, is, given the scale of the asset that we have and those which are ash trees, is getting in early enough to see the damage and get the trees removed. And the second question, sorry, can you recap for me? It's absolutely gone out of my head, Councillor Goldie.
Essentially, just on the questions there, one of the questions, I was essentially saying, would the council take action on trees that were just reducing the light within an area? And it's just the associations with mental health, seasonal affective disorder and lack of vitamin D. If, for example, we got a note from the GP or something saying that this is severely affecting the residents' mental health or that, could we take that into consideration, or the fact that we're not going to tackle it purely on light be the final stance?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Goldie, and I fully understand the question. So the lines laid out in the policy are to protect trees, because there are many reasons, as you know, why people approach us for the removal of trees. And I guess the base assumption is that we try to protect healthy trees. We all know the value of trees, not least from actually a mental health and well-being perspective in terms of forest bathing, but also the benefit that trees bring in terms of the environment, carbon capture, etc. So there is, for exceptional circumstances, the ability to refer any particular issue to the head of service, Councillor Goldie. So it's not an absolute, but it is about protecting trees and the asset. But there is an alternative.
Happy with that, Willie? Yep. Okay, Councillor Carragher. Tracy.
Thanks, Michael. I think kind of like everybody, probably every councillor on here, you'll receive inquiries from constituents about trees, and then we discover that they're not council owned, they're own land that's owned by somebody else. So, you know, I do welcome the work that's been done on this, and I welcome that the intention is in the future to have like an online portal that, similar to the one with the areas of land for grass maintenance, that members of the communities will be able to sign on and see if those trees are on council land or not. I do worry about we might end up in the same situation that we are in right now with regards to like the grass maintenance, where members of the community then say, well, who does own it? So I understand that's a big task, but I don't know if it can be considered like moving forward when this is going to be put on an online portal. Thanks.
Nicole, you want to come back in there, please?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Carragher, I understand your point. So it's probably worth me saying that at this point it is not similar to the grass area. So at this point we are looking at the trees that are in council ownership. There's no sense that we're about to say there are trees that aren't in council ownership. My understanding is those aren't in dispute. The real focus of this pilot work and actually rolling it out further is that we know where trees are, but we need to understand the number, we need to understand the condition, and as soon as we know, basically, the information will be there and available for members of the public to see as well. So this is about us, one, having the information ourselves to be able to proactively manage our tree stock, but also be able to share that with members of the public. It is the case, of course, that there are many private areas and many privately owned trees, but of course you'll understand as head of service, my focus is to make sure that we can map and get all the available information and get proactive management in place for all the trees that are in council ownership.
Thanks, Nicole. Tracy, you okay with that? Thank you. Councillor Mooney. Nora.
Thanks very much, Convener. It's just in response to Councillor Goldie's comments about ash dieback. There's quite a considerable amount of information online about it. But unfortunately, from what I've read, if there's a group of trees that have it, by cutting down those trees and maybe the surrounding ones round about it, it won't actually stop it. It's actually spores that travel from the infected trees, and they can travel up to 10 miles, which is the main problem. So you would have to cut down every single tree within a 10-mile radius at best. And even then that might not even work, because if the spores have moved on to trees in that vicinity, then you could be talking about a further 10 miles. So it is quite a considerable problem. Like I said, there's an awful lot of information online about it. And there's actually a website called Tree Alert, and they're encouraging people to read up on the symptoms. And if you see any of the symptoms on trees that you happen happen to be walking through the woods to report it, because that's the only way they can keep tabs on it and deal with the problem. But like I said, there's a great deal of information. It's really easy to spot on trees that have ash dieback, because during the summer, where you've got the glorious green leaves in most of the trees, there's a patch of them that are black and hanging withered. And because the amount of water getting to that particular part of the tree has been stopped by the fungus that has caused the actual ash dieback in the first place. And very often there's a diamond shape on the actual trunk of the tree round about the actual branch itself. And again, that's a dead giveaway that the tree has it. But I would encourage everyone to go on and have a wee read up about it. It's really very interesting information. But cutting down trees is not necessarily going to be the thing that stops it. It's more about the vigilance and the reporting. The positive things, though, in reading about it is that some trees do survive ash dieback, depending on the genetics of the tree. So not every tree will succumb to the disease. Some fight through it. So, but just to give Councillor Goldie a wee bit of information, thanks.
That's very helpful, Nora. Again, Councillor Hogg, Paddy.
Thanks, Convener. Can I say thanks to Nicole for this paper? It's an excellent paper, and it's good to see that we're getting a tree asset management audit being done and pilot. Just from observational experience with a call out winds down towards Luggy Bank, I got a call about a large elm tree where a huge branch at the top, the tree would be maybe 40 feet, and a very large branch had cracked during a storm and was lying across the country road near the Luggy, and called out council tree cutting staff. They came out and were just literally about to climb up and deal with the dangerous branch when a call came in saying that the council did not own the land. Now, what I would suggest here is that it looked as though there was a grey area, because if you've got the sort of the tarmac edge on a country road, and then you've got maybe 3 feet or 4 feet of an embankment, and the trees there, it is always probably going to be disputable whether that land is attached to the farm or whether we, as the council, are responsible for the maintenance of that land. And I think what happened in that case was it took a few days before it was acknowledged that the council would take responsibility for it, and then the staff came back down and they cut the dangerous branch away. So just pointing out that there might still be grey areas where it's a few feet, because with lots of country roads like that. I've stopped and cleared branches off the road near the rugby pitch near Cumbernauld, and just done it myself without calling people in to do it. It wasn't a problem. But it's good to see that we're moving in this direction, and I would love to praise the staff that we've got who go out in emergencies and cut down the dangerous hanging over branches and try and protect the public, because there's always the odd accident during the winter, during the storms, and we have got very highly qualified, skilled staff that do a superb job. Thank you.
Thank you. I would echo the sentiments, Paddy. We do have a dedicated staff, and they absolutely do a fantastic job. Colleagues, I don't see any further names in the chat bar, so can I then direct us to the recommendations, which there are 4 of, which are at the top of page 20. And by the way, colleagues, it's something we really need to, number 2, the council really need to have their eye on the ball on this, because this could be a serious, have serious implications for the future. So I'll be happy to agree with this, colleagues. Thank you. Takes us on to item 8, sorry, here we are. The outcome of the consultation proposed diversion of a core path 281, and this report is on page 143 to 146. And Nicole, you're going to say, talk to this paper. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Convener. So I sent in the paper, an online petition was submitted to the council on the 4th of February of this year, which to date contains 131 signatures, which sought to close core path 281, which is between Airbles Road and Camp Road in Motherwell. It connects essentially the Beechwood Estate and the Electric Bar. Our report was, as per the council's processes submitted to the Motherwell Community Board on the 10th of March, which sought approval for the Community Green Space team to undertake a consultation on the diversion of part of the core path under the terms provided in Section 20 of the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003. The report to the board also outlined the situation relating to the public rights of access that would still exist under the Act following any proposed diversion, as the statutory Section 20 diversion would not close a lane, just reroute a section of core path. The report sets out the details of the consultation undertaken during May 2021 and seeks approval for the recommendation to proceed to determination as set out and following the procedures contained in the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003. If I can point members towards the details of the consultation, including paragraph 2.2 and the outcome of the consultation in paragraphs 2.3 to 2.6, which in summary detail there are still 12 objections which have been maintained following individual contact with individual objectors, and in line with the procedures set out in Section 20 of the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003, the route for the Council is therefore to pass this case to Scottish Ministers for determination. Finally, in Section 2.9, given the ongoing continued incidences of antisocial behaviour in this area and the fact it will take some time for Scottish Ministers to determine, I've set out the actions which we intend to take, both across the Council and our partners in Police Scotland, to try and manage the additional antisocial behaviour in this area. So within the recommendations, there are 4 in number, with the key one being parts 3A and 3B, which is the approval of the next step of referring the 12 remaining objections to Scottish Ministers for determination, which is directed under Section 20 of the Land Reform Scotland Act 2003, and thereafter for the Council to implement the decision of the Scottish Ministers, whatever that should be. I'm happy to take any questions or comments on the report.
Thanks for that, Nicole. First off is Councillor Duffy, Councillor Kenneth Duffy. Kenneth.
Thanks, Convener. Now, this lane is on the boundary to my own ward, but I do know the ward members, Councillor Gallagher and Councillor Kelly, have been deeply involved in the case. The residents in the local area, as the paper outlines, have suffered from terrible antisocial behaviour for some time. And one of the gentlemen, like Nicole says, came along to the Motherwell Community Board and gave a fantastic update and a real life story into the impact it's having. The lane's been used by certain individuals and groups as a shortcut down to the Barnes Hall area, which also sees high levels of antisocial behaviour, and it has impacted the health and well-being down in the Beechwood area, with some of them even choosing to sell their own homes. I have to say I'm disappointed at point 2.7. I don't think pre-guessing the Scottish Minister's decision is helpful. Nicole has given assurances going forward that the Council will continue to work with Police Scotland and other partners to support residents. I'm sure that will be welcomed by the local members, including myself, in the boundary. And we look forward to seeing some actions that will be taken from that. And ask Nicole, will the Council stress about the serious levels of an instance of antisocial behaviour to the Scottish Ministers? Because, you know, Police Scotland have been along to the community boards. Police Scotland have been along to the community boards, and they've made it quite clear, you know, they're not happy with this lane, and they understand what the residents are saying. So just to look to see if the Council will be stressing that as part of it tabled to the Scottish Ministers.
Thanks for that, Kenny. Nicole.
Yeah, thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Duffy. Indeed, I think the level of antisocial behaviour which the residents have experienced is probably well laid out in the fact that there remain 12 objections which can't be mitigated. I want to be very clear, because I think the team have tried to manage expectations throughout, that this is part of our legal process, and the Council and the access officers have tried their utmost to be professional and follow that legal process. Where that takes us is the recommendation within the paper today, which is that it has to go into the Scottish Ministers, because we do have 12 remaining objections. Indeed, had there been one remaining objection, then it has to go into Scottish Ministers for determination. I accept that it is perhaps unhelpful and unwelcome. The officers have shared a view with committee, but again, I think that's in terms of managing expectations, that the reality is that core paths, and given their standing in access legislation, it is unlikely that the Scottish ministers will see fit to close or divert the path. They're held in very high standing. But I can give assurance to Councillor Duffy and to the rest of the committee that the concerns, the difficulties and the levels of antisocial behaviour and all the interventions that have been put in place to date by the Council, its teams and its partners will be laid out to Scottish ministers to allow them to take into consideration and come to their own conclusion as to what's appropriate.
Cool. Kenneth, you okay with that?
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Kenny. Willie Goldie.
Thanks, convener. Members that we have within the areas have highlighted the issues of the antisocial behaviour, etc. And we'll accept the recommendations of that. It's just really the point that Councillor Duffy was making there, you know, and I know we're saying that officers giving opinion or that there, but it's just to have on record that it says legitimate access rights are shown to be being exercised by the objectors and the root cause of antisocial behaviour will require to be tackled and Police Scotland remaining the competent authority. It's unlikely, reading that will be approved by the ministers, but essentially it looks like the ministers legally would reject it, but it's just to put on record. No problem with the recommendations about it going forward though. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Willie. Councillor Douglas. Trevor.
Thank you, convener. As Councillor Duffy has said, the residents of the local area and especially Elmhurst have been impacted by antisocial behaviour for many years due to people using the access line which connects the electric bar to the residential estate as a route to Barnes Hall. The reason they use it has quite clearly been shown in the local newspapers, the Bishop Press. A lot of it is to do with drink, hiding from the police. The local residents have been absolutely terrorised. Examples include cars and properties being vandalised and damaged, residents being verbally abused, bottles being thrown, and the area generally disrespected to the local people that live there. No one should have to live in the fear that what's going to come at the weekend, if it's going to be people shouting all night, passing through past the house. You know, it's trying to be a peaceful neighbourhood, and it's absolutely terrible what the people are having to put up with. The residents were hoping that this committee meeting would come and we would get a solution, and that the path would be closed and there would be a rewritten of it. But understand the councillors through cross-party work and have worked with the council officers to bring the paper today, which we appreciate, but the outcome unfortunately looks bleak. The section mentioned before that although it's being referred to the Scottish ministers, it looks unlikely to pass and it will be rejected. That's incredibly disappointing. And basically with that, and I had a question, does the council believe that the CCTV that they use at the minute, they're talking about more CCTV, do you think that would assist? Because obviously the CCTVs that's there isn't putting people off, obviously the antisocial behaviour. So is CCTV more of it realistically going to make any difference for the local people?
Nicole.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Councillor Douglas. I think I'll come in initially and then I might ask my colleague Andrew McPherson, who manages the enforcement teams, just to supplement my response. But the reality is, yes, I know the area. I've seen the many letters and representations that we have as a local authority, and indeed as the access authority from local residents. We have tried many methods before, and that includes CCTV. But my understanding is that we are purchasing more and different mobile CCTV units, and we look to deploy as much as we possibly can, not to fixed units, but also to units which are essentially moved around. We're trying to use every tool in our arsenal, and that is together with partners in Police Scotland to deal with the antisocial behaviour issues and try and desist, because there is no doubt that it is very, very difficult for the people living in that area. But I would want to emphasise again, the access officers are acting professionally, and in line with the opportunity they have and the tools that they have to actually bring this to a conclusion, one way or another, and that is to take it through this legal process. And at this point, because of the objections remaining, it needs to go to Scottish Ministers.
Thanks, Nicole. Trevor, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I think someone else was going to come in about the CCTV possibly, or
Sorry, Andrew. Andrew, you were going to come in about the CCTV.
Yeah, we are purchasing additional CCTV cameras primarily for purposes of fly tipping and detection, as we know. But
Andrew, there's a wee bit of difficulty hearing you just now. I don't know if you.
Sorry, is that better?
It's a wee bit better, yeah.
Yeah, my connection seems to be dropping now and again. Sorry about that, convener. But yeah, we are purchasing additional cameras, but it seems to be it's more sort of for fly tipping detection than anything else. However, what we can do is take an action away just to have a word with our partners in the CCTV centre to see if there's any potential for additional cameras to be placed there and whether that would impact somebody. That's okay.
You okay with that, Trevor?
thank you very much, convener, and thank you very much to the officers for answering that. It's just obviously this is going to be very difficult for the officers. The government's obviously probably likely to reject it, but if there's anything we can do to assist the local residents, I'm sure it will be appreciated. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've got a wee bit of personal experience here. Back in the late 70s to early 80s, I lived in my mother's house. We stayed there for 50 odd years, and the council, without any consultation, in the early 70s, mid 70s, put a path right down the back of our garden, and it became the biggest drinking lane, biggest drug, and by the way, it was drugs at the late 80s when the council eventually seen sense. The Monklands District Council at the time seen sense and closed it down. But our windows used to get put in, and I'm not kidding, on a weekly basis. And if you're out to challenge them, you were going to get dragged over the fence. It's absolutely horrendous having to live with that. So my heart goes out to the people in this area, and hopefully the Scottish ministers will see sense and do the right thing in this one. Thank you. So, colleagues, can I then direct you to the recommendations, which are 4 of, and then page 143, can we ask for agreement on this? Thank you. Thank you. Colleagues, it now takes us on to item number 9, which is on 147-156. It's the week control review. Now, colleagues, as of the council meeting last week, all of the decisions that were taken there supersede a lot of what's in here. So I'm moving this from approval to noting. So is there any questions, any relevant questions, may I add, that we're not going over all ground? Councillor Goldie.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, absolutely no intention of opening up the debate again from Thursday. We wouldn't be able to anyway because it would fall under the 6 months rule. We have we have an amendment which is essentially additional recommendations, essentially just to put timelines on things. So I would propose that we accept the additional recommendations. That will be seconded by Councillor Carracher, and Mark has a copy of it if he's quite happy to share that on screen.
Okay, let's have a look at it. Mark, can you move it up a wee bit? I can't see. Sorry. Right, okay. I'm not the motion. I don't know. I've need to take a wee bit of advice on this. Robert Steenson, would you, or Nicole? Sorry, Nicole.
Maybe I'll come in first, convener, if that's okay. I'm looking at the additional recommendations, and they appear to be factual. They're statements of what has already occurred, that they're not requiring the service to make any change to the decision that was made at the council meeting last week. And it's also just stating the decision of the committee in
in May. So I'll pass over to Mark just to deem in the competence of it. But from a service point of view, I would think it's a statement of fact rather than any instruction or any change to any decisions that's been made. Thanks, convener.
That's fine, Mark.
Thank you, convener. I've looked at the additional recommendations that have been put in, and in fact, the points 1 and 2 are actually narrated within the background to the report, and the third point is a factual statement that the council passed an amendment to reintroduce glyphosate. So my own view is that it's competent.
Okay, well, with that, I'll agree with the committee's indulgence to add that to recommendations, not unless they're otherwise minded, but we'll leave that, we'll hold it just now because we've got Paddy Hall. Paddy, do you want to come in?
Thanks, convener. Just an observation. Clearly, I was opposed to what happened last week, but we're not going to drag that back. The decision's made. I'm a professional and a Democrat, so accept that. Council has made that choice. But can I refer back to the May's committee paper in which made some conditionality about the possibility of bringing in glyphosate again, where there was conditionality that the council would seek to stay away from play parks and areas where people walk their dogs. I would like to flag up to colleagues that I'm aware of many people in the Cumbernauld area who have made complaints that they believe glyphosate was responsible for, right or wrongly, responsible for some of the illnesses that their pets got, and they took these pets to. So I'm just saying, could I ask for a reassurance from the officers that with the reintroduction, that the conditionality that was mentioned in the May paper will be put into practice?
I think that goes without saying. Would you like to?
Yeah, thank you, convener. No, it would be our intention, Councillor Hogg, to revert back to the integrated pest management route which was suggested, which was actually looking to use glyphosate in the most appropriate places, and that was with the avoidance of play parks, etc. But also within that recommendation, it was about a phased reduction. So I made the point earlier in response to quite a different paper about having the right management regime for the right environment. And that's what we'll be working towards over the next 3 years, rather than just simply saying it's not play parks, etc. So no, we will not be spraying glyphosate as we move forward in play parks, just as we set out in the paper, but we will also be looking over the next 3-year period to the most appropriate locations for the use of glyphosate to ensure that we can control weeds and spray our grass edges and look to reduce the use of that as much as we possibly can. And that's what we set out in the May paper, and that would still be our intention.
Thanks. Paddy, you okay with that?
Yep, thanks, convener. I just hope we miss any form of litigation. Thank you.
So the Trevor, Councillor Douglas.
Convener, thank you. I'm a bit confused as to what the recommendation is. The paper that the SNP have brought is a recommendation, but it doesn't have any recommendations in it. It's merely bringing further information that could possibly be slotted in to 1.2. It doesn't bring any new information. It's just, and I don't know how it could fit in a recommendation, because there is no recommendation to make. It's just saying facts, so it should really be in the background and not as a recommendation. I'm a bit confused. If someone could clarify that, please. Thank you.
Nicole or Robert? I think Robert did clarify it. Robert, do you want to come back and re-clarify?
Yeah, I think if in front of the additional lines submitted by Councillor Goldie, if you put in committee notes that and then denote the 3 points, then it would fit in with the recommendations. If that's suitable to everyone.
Well, are you happy to do that?
Yeah, convener, it's just it does say note before the points anyway, as do most of the other points in that. So I'm quite happy if you want to put committee note or whatever on it, that's fine. Might tidy up the typo on the bottom one as well. It says not the proposed annual updates. But yeah, it's just essentially to time up to tidy up the timeline and to provide the additional information of that.
Okay.
I have no issues as long as it's competent. It's fine. If you want to change it to committee note rather than just note, I have no issues about it.
Okay, Tracy Carragher, see you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think it's important to have like the statements of fact there basically, and it's obviously been ruled competent. Just something that's come into my head though when we've been discussing this, did the amendment at Thursday's special council where it's recommended to be reintroduced glyphosates, did that state that it reverts back to the May paper on how those glyphosates are reintroduced? It's just it is for clarity and to make sure that there's like no ambiguity about it. Off the top of my head, I don't think it did state that.
Tracy, what it reverted back to was May's paper, the recommendations there in May, which would be, as Nicole's already said, to phase out glyphosate within 2 or 3 years, or might, as soon as at all possible, to phase it out. Nobody wants to use it, but at the same time, we've got to have a credible. We can't go back to what happened in May. We've got to have a credible alternative, and that is what we're seeking to do.
Yeah, I understand that, Michael. Sorry, that's not my question. I'm saying, and I can't remember, and I've not got the amendment in front of me. Did the amendment state that's what we had to revert back to, or did it just? I can't remember the words. Did it just say to reintroduce glyphosate?
Well, somebody seconded it, I can't remember offhand, but listen, let's not split hairs. We're doing the right thing, we're going forward, we're getting rid of it as soon as at all possible. I'll restate that again, as soon as at all possible. As soon as we get a credible, something that we can rely on, and obviously cost effective, you'll get rid of it. And I would still say we should get rid of all chemicals-based herbicides, but that's a big ask. Tracy?
Genuinely, I'm not splitting hairs. It's just about clarity and that we've got it in writing. I see that Robert and Nicole are both wanting to come in, so maybe they'll clear that up for me.
Okay.
If I could come in, convener, probably Nicole's going to say the same as me. It did not say specifically, Councillor Carragher, but as a service, we've taken that instruction to operate with glyphosate as outlined by Nicole at this meeting. So I think the head of service for the area said how we'll use it, and we'll use it in accordance with the paper in May. So I think that's recorded for this committee, and that's us saying how the service will take it forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Nicole, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, no, Robert's entirely correct. It was just simply to add, convener, that in the May agreement, in the May paper, the committee did agree to take forward the integrated pest management approach, but at that point without the use of glyphosate. So it wasn't explicitly stated last Thursday, but it would be, I presume, intended that we take it forward as that integrated pest management approach, which was very wide. So yes, it was about reducing the use of glyphosate or any herbicide that was being used at that point, and it came at it from many different fronts. So not just a reduction or the use in the most appropriate place, but actually put forward a number of different ways that we said we would bring back a report to tackle that. So some of that could be, for instance, increased a move to hard surfaces, for example, within our cemeteries, rather than blazed paths. That removes the extent of the weed issues, and therefore the extent of spraying that we have to do. So we will look at it in the round. As I say, it was already agreed back in the May paper that it would be an integrated approach. So that's what we'll now take forward, but with glyphosate.
Okay, colleagues. I don't see any further names in the chat bar. So then, can I ask you to look at the recommendations in bottom page 147 with the addition of the recommendation from Willie's amendment? I'll be happy to agree the report, colleagues. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Moving on to item 10, which is the strategic performance framework, latest performance results from regular service and waste solutions. Now, Andrew is going to give us a quick overview of this. This is the first of its type coming to our committee once again. So, Andrew, would you like to come in, please?
Yep, thanks, convener. Can you hear me okay now?
Good. It's just to say that the report's there, and I'm happy to answer any questions on it. Obviously, there's a lot of detail there. But what I would say, just to emphasise, convener, your own point, this is not an exception report. This is not a report coming because this service isn't failing in any regard. This is the first of many reports. Every service will be covered by a similar report. It's just that I've got the pleasure of being fact.
Andrew, could you just hold on a second? Mary Gourley, you've shared something on the screen. Could you maybe take it down, please? Andrew, sorry to interrupt you there. Were you just about finished what you were going to say there?
Yeah, I just say that this is not an exception report. This every service will be a similar report will go to the relevant committee. So it's just that we've got the pleasure of being the first person to do this one.
Okay, colleagues, any comments, questions to this report? Don't see any names in the chat bar. So ask you to agree the recommendations, which there are 4 of. Yeah, no, sorry, 3. So that's agreed. Okay, moving on to item 11, which is the Clyde Valley residual waste contract, pages 167 to 172. Again, this is here for colleagues. Has anyone got any questions or comments? Willie Goldie.
Thanks, convener. It's always me. Just in the Clyde Valley residual waste, I know that we managed to get an additional 4% of metal recyclate from Bargedi. Now, it was just interesting to see, did we manage to get that because it was metal, or is there potential for other recyclates to be removed at that point?
Andrew?
Yeah, the contract states that we should achieve a minimum of 4% recycling from residual waste. Now, originally that was supposed to be made up of metal and plastic. So the plastic was removed, but because of the levels of contamination and the volatility of the recyclate market, as we all know, there was no home for that material. So Viridor, who operate the Bargedi plant, have got dispensation from SEPA not to recover the plastic at present. So the only recovery at the moment is metal, and that's still achieving roughly the 4% we need. In the report there, if we did include the plastic, it should bring us up to roughly about 4.5%, but at the moment it's just metal and it's 4%.
Andrew, Willie, you want a supplementary?
Aye, thanks, Chair. It's just to say, so can we oversee Viridor to make sure they are recycling, or they are removing what's there, or is that almost an impossible task?
It's not even a manual task. It's a mechanical process, just by basically just big magnets. That's the best way to describe it. It takes the metal out, but it is part of the contract. They need to achieve that 4%. They are doing it just, but you know, and that's the way we monitor it through that contract.
I don't see any further names in the chat bar, which takes us on to the final item of today's committee, which is item 12, contracts awarded below committee approval threshold, and it's a report from page 173 to 176. Is there any questions or comments, colleagues? I don't see any in the chat bar. So, colleagues, can I thank you for your attendance today? A very, very well behaved meeting, and thank you very much, and hope to see you all soon, and go out and enjoy that weather. Thank you.
Thanks, convener, for the collegiate approach on the additional recommendations.